This was a team decision, my boss said. His voice was calm. His hands were folded on the conference table. He looked at me like he was delivering news everyone already agreed on. I looked around the room. 7 faces. People I'd worked with for 3 years. Not one of them met my eyes. Sarah from operations stared at her laptop. Marcus from sales studied his phone. Jennifer, who I'd helped through 2 major projects last month, examined her fingernails like they held answers. The silence landed harder than the words. My boss, Derek Hutchins, smiled slightly. He repeated the phrase, slower this time. The team felt this was the right direction. He emphasized team like it was evidence, like consensus made it true. I didn't speak. I didn't give him tears. I didn't give him anger. I just sat there, hands in my lap, watching him wait for me to react. He wanted something. Anything. A plea. An argument. Maybe even gratitude for his honesty. I gave him nothing. The quiet made him uncomfortable. He shifted in his chair. He cleared his throat. Then he slid a folder across the table toward me. Termination packet. My name printed on the tab. Someone coughed. I couldn't tell who. The sound broke through the stillness like glass cracking. I looked at Marcus again. His face had gone pale. His jaw was tight. He looked like someone holding their breath underwater. Derek smiled wider. He said the word again. Consensus. He drew it out this time. He was daring someone to contradict him. Daring anyone to speak up and say what we all knew. That this wasn't consensus. That this was Derek covering his tracks. Nobody spoke. The silence proved his point, or so he thought. I watched Sarah's fingers hover over her keyboard. She wasn't typing. She was frozen. Jennifer's knee bounced under the table. Nervous energy with nowhere to go. Derek leaned back in his chair. He looked satisfied now. He'd said his piece. He'd made it official. He'd wrapped his decision in the safety of group agreement. If anyone questioned it later, he could point to this moment. To this room. To the silence. I still said nothing. Not because I had nothing to say. Because I knew something Derek didn't. Silence isn't agreement. Silence is fear. And fear eventually talks. Derek opened the folder for me. Like I needed help. Like I couldn't read. He pointed to the signature line with his pen. Standard separation, he said. 2 weeks severance. Effective immediately. No warning. No performance review. No prior write-ups. I checked my file last month during a routine HR request. It was clean. Not a single documented concern. Yet here I was, being walked out for reasons no one would name. He thanked me for my contributions. The word felt hollow. Contributions. Like I'd volunteered at a bake sale instead of rebuilding their entire client database when it crashed. Like I hadn't stayed late 47 nights last quarter fixing problems Derek created during rushed presentations. The room felt complicit. Everyone in it had benefited from my work. They'd asked me questions. They'd requested my help. They'd copied my processes. Now they sat silent while Derek erased me. I reached for the folder. Derek's smile widened. He thought I was accepting it, signing away my right to fight. I pulled the folder toward me slowly. Then I closed it without looking inside. I'll review this with my attorney, I said. My voice was steady. Quiet. Derek's smile faltered. Derek stood up too quickly. He announced the meeting was over. People scattered. Chairs scraped. Laptops snapped shut. Nobody looked at me directly, but I felt their glances. Quick. Guilty. They moved around me like I was already gone. HR appeared within minutes. Linda from Human Resources. She'd hired me 3 years ago. Shook my hand. Told me I'd do great things here. Now she stood in my workspace with a cardboard box and a security escort. My access was already revoked. I tried to log into my email. Password invalid. I checked Slack on my phone. Account disabled. They'd move fast. Like I was dangerous. Like I might steal something. Or worse, tell the truth about what happened. I packed slowly. Linda watched. So did the security guard, whose name I didn't know. He looked uncomfortable. Like he knew this was wrong but had a job to do. I understood that feeling now. My coworkers walked past. Some made eye contact. Most didn't. One person stopped. Marcus. He opened his mouth, like he might say something. Then he looked at Linda and kept walking. His silence said more than words could. Sarah appeared at the end of my row. She whispered, "I'm sorry." Then she kept going. Didn't stop. Didn't offer to help. Just sorry, delivered in passing. Like it was enough. That apology became fuel. I thought about the weeks before this. When I was useful. When Derek needed me. 3 weeks ago, the VP of Operations visited our office. Derek panicked because his quarterly report had errors. Math that didn't add up. Conclusions that contradicted the data. He'd asked me to fix it. Quietly. Without telling anyone. I spent 6 hours reworking his analysis. I found 4 major mistakes. I corrected them. I made him look competent. He presented my work the next morning. Got praise for his attention to detail. He never thanked me. Not once. He just smiled and accepted the credit like it had always been his. I told myself it didn't matter. That being helpful was its own reward. That loyalty would be remembered. I'd stayed late so many times. Not because my work required it. Because Derek's work required saving. He'd commit to deadlines without checking if they were realistic. He'd promise clients features we hadn't built. He'd make decisions without understanding their impact. And I'd quietly fix it. I'd fill the gaps. I'd prevent disasters before anyone knew they were coming. I thought that made me valuable. I thought it made me secure. I was wrong. Loyalty isn't mutual when the other person sees you as a tool. I remember the first time Derek stole my work. It was 8 months into my job. I'd created a new tracking system for client communications. It reduced response time by 40%. It improved customer satisfaction scores. It was elegant and simple. Derek presented it in a leadership meeting. He used my exact words. My same examples. He even kept my color coding system in the slides. His name was the only one listed as creator. Mine appeared nowhere. I found out from Jennifer. She'd been in the meeting. She mentioned it casually, like it was normal. Derek's new system looks great, she said. I didn't correct her. I should have. That was my first mistake. I told myself it wasn't worth fighting over. That leadership knew I'd built it. That credit would come eventually. But leadership didn't know. How could they? Derek never told them. And I never spoke up. It happened again 2 months later. Then again. Each time I rationalized it. Each time I chose silence. I thought making waves would hurt my career. I didn't realize staying quiet was already destroying it. By the time I understood, Derek had built his reputation on my work. And I'd helped him do it. The isolation started small. A meeting disappeared from my calendar. "Oh, we moved that," Derek said when I asked. "Didn't need your input this time." He smiled when he said it, like he was doing me a favor, saving me time. Then another meeting. Then 3. Decisions started happening without me. I'd find out through emails sent after the fact. Per today's discussion, they'd say. Discussions I wasn't part of. Decisions I had no voice in. Derek started using phrases like, "People feel you're not aligned." He never said which people. Never gave examples. Just vague concerns about fit and culture. I asked directly, "What specifically am I doing wrong?" He'd shake his head. "It's not one thing. Just a vibe." Vibes became weapons. Feelings became facts. And I had no way to defend myself against them. How do you prove you're aligned? How do you fix a problem nobody will name? I worked harder. I arrived earlier. I stayed later. I tried to become indispensable. But indispensable people are threats. And Derek didn't want threats. He wanted obedience. When I gave him competence instead, he decided I had to go. My coworkers pulled away gradually. It wasn't cruel. It was careful. Sarah stopped asking me to lunch. Marcus stopped copying me on updates. Jennifer started closing her laptop when I walked past her desk. Nobody was mean. Nobody said anything harsh. They just created distance. Professional distance. The kind that protects them when things go wrong. They were reading signals I hadn't seen yet. They knew Derek was building a case. They didn't want to be associated with the target. Conversations ended when I entered rooms. Not abruptly, just naturally, like they'd reached a conclusion right before I arrived. People smiled at me. They still said good morning. But they stopped asking my opinion. They stopped including me in decisions. I felt like I was disappearing in real time. Present but irrelevant. There but not needed. Fear was doing Derek's work for him. He didn't have to tell people to avoid me. They did it themselves. Self-preservation. I understood it. I didn't blame them. But I remembered it. I asked Derek directly if my job was safe. It was a Tuesday, 2 weeks before he fired me. We were in his office. Door closed. He leaned back in his chair and smiled. "You're reading too much into things," he said. "People go through phases. Teams shift. It's normal." He said it like I was being paranoid. Like my concerns were emotional, not observational. "Is there anything I should be doing differently?" I asked. He shook his head. "Just keep doing what you're doing." His tone was light, reassuring, completely false. I left that meeting feeling uncertain. Maybe I was overthinking it. Maybe the distance was temporary. Maybe I'd misread the signals. Derek's calmness made me doubt my own perception. 2 weeks later, he fired me in front of the team. Called it consensus. Thanked me for my contributions. Acted like it was a mutual understanding. I realized then that gaslighting doesn't require lies. It just requires confident delivery. He told me my job was safe. He told me to keep working. He'd smiled while planning my removal. And when I questioned him, he made me feel crazy for asking. That was intentional. That was strategy. That was Derek. The night after I was fired, nobody checked on me. No text. No call. Not even a generic, "Hope you're okay" message. I lay in bed staring at my ceiling. I replayed Derek's voice. This was a team decision. Team decision. Like they'd voted. Like they deliberated. Like my future had been debated and resolved democratically. I knew it was a lie, but lies told confidently become truth to people who weren't there. The silence from my coworkers hurt more than the firing. I'd worked beside these people for years. I'd helped them. I'd covered for them when they made mistakes. I'd celebrated their wins. I'd listened to their complaints. Now, nothing. Radio silence. They'd moved on already. Or maybe they were relieved. One less person competing for limited spots. One less variable to worry about. My absence made their positions feel safer. I didn't cry that night. I felt too numb for tears. I just lay there, understanding something fundamental. They hadn't just fired me. They'd rewritten history. In Derek's version, everyone agreed. Everyone supported this. The narrative was set, and I had to decide if I'd accept it. I heard through a former teammate what Derek told leadership. She accepted the decision professionally, he said. Like I'd agreed. Like I'd understood. Like I'd shaken his hand and walked away grateful for the opportunity. I didn't accept anything. I was ambushed. There's a difference between processing shock and endorsing a lie. But Derek knew how to spin it. He made my silence look like consent. He turned my composure into agreement. The teammate who told me this felt bad, I could hear it in their voice. But they didn't correct Derek. They didn't tell leadership what really happened. They just passed the information to me and added, "I thought you should know." Like knowing changed anything. This was the second betrayal. The first was the firing. The second was the story they told about it. Derek didn't just want me gone. He wanted me erased correctly. Quietly. With minimal disruption. He needed the narrative clean. Professional separation. Mutual understanding. No hard feelings. Those were the words he used. Those were the lies he sold. And leadership bought them because believing him was easier than investigating. But investigations have a way of starting when people least expect them. A coworker reached out 5 days later. Not to comfort me. Not to apologize. To ask where I'd saved a file. A client template they needed. Something I'd built and maintained. Something they'd relied on but never learned to create themselves. "Hey, quick question," the message started. Like we were still colleagues. Like nothing had changed. "Do you remember where that Q3 template is stored? Casual. Transactional. Like my value was still accessible even though I wasn't." I stared at the message for a long time. I could have ignored it. I could have told them to figure it out themselves. But I didn't. I responded with the exact location. Professional. Helpful. Exactly what they expected. They thanked me with a thumbs-up emoji. That was it. No, how are you doing? No, sorry about what happened. Just a thumbs up. They got what they needed. I was useful one more time. That's when I understood clearly. They still needed my work. They just didn't want me. My processes, my systems, my knowledge, those had value. But I was replaceable. Or so they thought. They were about to learn the difference between accessing someone's work and understanding it. Another teammate reached out 2 weeks later. We met for coffee. Neutral location. No company eyes. She looked nervous before she even sat down. She ordered. We made small talk. Then she said it. I wanted to explain. She spoke quietly. Derek told us not to contradict him in the meeting. He said it would confuse the message. She looked at her cup, not at me. I have a mortgage. I have kids. I couldn't risk it. I didn't argue. I didn't get angry. I just listened. Because she was telling the truth. Fear is reasonable when your livelihood depends on someone else's approval. I understood that. I lived that. Did Derek consult anyone before the meeting? I asked. She shook her head. Not that I know of. He just told us the day before that changes were happening. That we needed to support leadership's decision. He made it sound final. So there it was. Confirmation. Derek hadn't consulted the team. He'd intimidated them. The team decision was a shield, not a vote. He'd used their silence as evidence. Their fear as consensus. She apologized before leaving. I accepted it without warmth. Apologies don't undo complicity. They just acknowledge it. I sat in my apartment after that coffee meeting. I pulled out a notebook. I started writing down what I knew. Not emotionally. Not angrily. Just factually. Timelines. Names. Dates. Who was told what and when. Derek had said team decision. But no meeting had happened before that day. No email chain existed discussing my performance. No documented concerns. No warnings. Just a sudden announcement presented as group consensus. That was a lie. A deliberate one. And lies leave gaps. Inconsistencies. Stories that don't align when people compare notes. Derek was counting on fear keeping people quiet. On isolation preventing conversation. On everyone protecting themselves individually. But fear doesn't last forever. And isolation breaks when someone starts asking questions. I didn't know when that would happen. But I knew I needed to be ready. I needed documentation. Timeline. Truth. So I documented everything. Every conversation I remembered. Every project I'd fixed. Every time Derek had taken credit. Every warning sign I'd ignored. I wrote it down. Organized it. Dated it. Not for revenge. For clarity. Because the truth doesn't need embellishment. It just needs organization. I stopped answering messages instantly. When former coworkers asked questions, I took my time. Hours instead of minutes. Days instead of hours. I provided only what was formally requested. No extra context. No helpful additions. No fixing of obvious gaps. This was new for me. I'd always been the person who anticipated needs. Who provided more than asked. Who made things easier for others. But I was gone now. They'd made that clear. So I acted like it. A request came in about client documentation I'd maintained. Can you explain the color coding system? Simple question. I could have written 3 paragraphs explaining the logic, the categories, the purpose. Instead, I wrote 1 sentence. Green means active, yellow means pending, red means urgent. No explanation of how to determine status. No guidance on when to escalate. Just the literal answer to the literal question. They had to ask 4 follow-up questions to get information I would have volunteered before. This wasn't cruelty. It was boundaries. They'd separated me from the team. So I separated my knowledge from their convenience. I was helpful when required. I was no longer helpful by default. And for the first time, mistakes started surfacing. Small ones at first. Then bigger. I thought about the pattern. How many times had I softened Derek's feedback before it reached others? How many reports had I rewritten to hide his weak analysis? How many errors had I caught before executives saw them? There was the budget projection he'd miscalculated by 14%. I'd found it during a late-night review. Fixed it. Never mentioned it. He presented it the next morning like he'd done the math himself. Leadership approved funding based on my corrections. There was the client proposal that promised features we didn't have. Derek had committed to a timeline without asking engineering. I'd quietly negotiated an extension with the client. Made it seem like their request instead of our mistake. Derek never knew how close that came to disaster. There was the presentation to investors. His slides had contradictory data. Numbers that didn't match from page to page. I'd stayed until midnight, making them coherent. He presented at 8 the next morning. Got praise for his clarity. I wasn't helping the company. I was protecting one man. I was hiding his incompetence so consistently that leadership thought he was competent. And when he didn't need me anymore, he fired me. Because I knew too much. Because I'd seen behind the curtain. The first visible failure happened 3 weeks after I left. A project I used to quietly stabilize started falling apart. It was a client portal update. Derek had promised monthly improvements. I'd been managing the timeline, coordinating with developers, catching issues before they went live. Without me, the process broke down. The update was late. Features didn't work. The client complained directly to leadership. Derek blamed transition challenges. He said my departure had created gaps. He made it sound like my fault, not his lack of planning. But his explanations sounded thin this time. Leadership asked specific questions. What was the delay? Who's managing this now? Why wasn't there a backup plan? Derek fumbled through answers. He couldn't explain systems he'd never understood. He'd always had me to explain, to translate his vague directions into actual work, to fill the space between his promises and reality. Now that space was visible, and it was wider than anyone realized. I heard about this through my network. People still in the company. People who notice things. They didn't tell me out of loyalty. They told me because it was interesting. Because Derek's reputation was starting to crack. I accepted a new job exactly 4 weeks after being fired. Better pay. Real authority. Actual respect. The interview process had been direct. They asked what I'd accomplished. I told them. They asked for examples. I provided them. No politics. No translation. Just competence recognized and valued. I told nobody from my old company. I didn't update LinkedIn. I didn't announce it. I let them assume whatever they wanted. Let them think I was struggling. Let them think firing me had been consequence-free for them. That assumption gave me patience. Because people who think you're desperate try to use you. People who think you're fine leave you alone. I needed them to need me again. And they would. Eventually. They always did. My new role started the following Monday. Clean slate. New team. Manager who asked my opinion and actually listened. Meetings where I was included by default, not as an afterthought. Work that was mine, credited properly, respected openly. I realized how much energy survival had taken at my old job. How exhausting it was to navigate Derek's ego. To anticipate his moods. To protect myself from his insecurities. In my new role, I just worked. Competence was enough. It was revolutionary. 2 months after I started my new job, my former company announced an internal review. Routine, they said. Standard compliance check. Happens every few years. Nothing unusual. But the timing felt specific. The review focused on departmental efficiency, on documentation practices, on management consistency. Those weren't random focuses. Those were targeted areas. Someone had raised questions. I felt my stomach tighten when I heard. Not with fear. With anticipation. Because reviews like that require documentation. Evidence. Paper trails. And I knew exactly what the paper trail showed. Or more accurately, what it didn't show. No documented warnings about my performance. No improvement plans. No progressive discipline. Just a sudden termination Derek had called a team decision. If investigators looked closely, they'd find gaps. Contradictions. A story that didn't hold up under scrutiny. Derek would have to explain those gaps. He'd have to justify decisions he'd made emotionally and presented as logical. He'd have to provide evidence that didn't exist. And for the first time, his charm wouldn't be enough. I waited, because investigations take time. And truth has a way of surfacing when people start looking carefully. The email arrived on a Thursday morning. Derek's name in my inbox. Subject line, quick question. I stared at it for a full minute before opening it. The tone was polite, professional, like we were colleagues catching up. Hope you're doing well, it started. As if he cared, as if he hadn't fired me publicly and rewritten the story. I'm organizing some documentation. For a routine audit. Could you clarify the timeline on the client portal project? Specifically your role in the September update. He wanted me to help him. To explain work he'd taken credit for. To fill in gaps he couldn't remember because he'd never done the work himself. The email had no apology. No acknowledgement of what he'd done. Just expectation. Like I owed him assistance. I read it 3 times. I felt anger rise, then settle. Getting emotional would be satisfying for 10 seconds. Being strategic would matter for months. I replied 6 hours later. Professional. Helpful. Exactly what he expected. I attached timeline documentation, version histories, meeting notes, email confirmations, everything factual, everything dated, everything showing exactly who had done what and when. I provided what he asked for. With receipts. His reply was brief. Thanks. No follow-up questions. Because the documents answered everything, including questions he didn't want to ask. The audit team didn't contact me directly. They worked through HR. Linda, who'd watched me pack my desk, now asked if I'd be willing to clarify some details. Just routine, she said. Part of the review process. I agreed. Professional. Cooperative. Exactly what they expected from someone with nothing to hide. We scheduled a call. I prepared carefully. Not rehearsed. Just organized. I knew my work. I knew the timeline. I knew what I'd contributed and what I'd fixed. The questions were specific. Who initiated the client portal redesign? Who managed the developer relationships? Who caught the security flaw before launch? Each question hit exactly where Derek's story was weakest. I answered factually. No embellishment. No emotion. I provided dates. I referenced emails. I explained decisions Derek had made without understanding their implications. I showed where I'd quietly corrected course before problems became visible. The story he told no longer matched the record. His version required me to be minimally involved. The documentation showed I'd been central. His narrative needed my departure to be unremarkable. The evidence showed projects immediately struggling without me. Truth doesn't require drama. It just requires consistency. And Derek's story was starting to show cracks. HR began interviewing other employees. Not formally. Not obviously. Just casual conversations. How are things going? Any concerns about current processes? Do you feel supported? Questions that seemed routine but gathered specific information. Suddenly people started remembering conversations they'd been told to forget. Sarah mentioned that Derek had instructed the team not to contradict him during my termination meeting. Marcus admitted he'd never been consulted about the decision. Jennifer confirmed there'd been no team discussion beforehand. Each person spoke independently. None of them knew what others had said, but their stories aligned. All of them described the same thing. Derek announcing a decision and calling it consensus. Derek using their silence as agreement. Derek creating a narrative that didn't match reality. The word consensus became radioactive. Leadership had accepted Derek's explanation because it sounded reasonable. Team decision. Group agreement. Logical progression. But when people started talking, that story fell apart. Silence had been expensive. Now people were calculating the cost. Not just for me. For themselves. Because if Derek lied about this, what else had he misrepresented? If he manipulated one situation, how many others had he controlled through fear? Questions multiplied, and Derek had fewer answers each time. The team decision unraveled completely during week 3 of the review. Multiple employees independently stated they'd never been consulted. Some said they'd only learned about my termination the morning it happened. Others said Derek had told them it was already decided and they needed to support leadership. Not one person confirmed Derek's version. Not one person said they participated in a decision. Not one person validated the consensus he claimed. The foundation of his story crumbled. Leadership couldn't ignore this. Multiple consistent statements from different people. Documentation showing no prior meetings. Email records showing no discussion. The math didn't work. Either Derek had lied, or 7 employees were coordinating a false story. Logic favored one explanation. Derek tried to reframe it. Team decision doesn't mean formal vote, he said. It means leadership acting in the team's interest. But that wasn't what he'd said in the meeting. He'd implied consultation. He'd suggested agreement. He'd used our silence as proof. Now that silence had voice. And every word contradicted him. His credibility wasn't just damaged. It was shattered. Because leaders can survive mistakes. They rarely survive documented lies. Derek started panicking quietly. The signs were subtle, but visible to people who knew him. He sent emails at midnight, called emergency meetings about minor issues, asked for status updates on projects that had been running fine for months. He became micromanaging and demanding, asking for documentation he'd never required before, questioning decisions he'd previously approved, creating paper trails where none had existed. He was trying to build evidence retroactively, trying to show he'd been involved, informed, essential. But his team noticed. The charm he'd always relied on was cracking. Pressure made him sharp instead of smooth. Fear made him controlling instead of confident. People saw someone scrambling instead of leading. His late-night emails felt desperate. His sudden interest in details felt false. His demands for loyalty felt like admissions of doubt. The more he tried to assert control, the more obvious it became that he was losing it. Leadership noticed too. They saw someone reacting instead of leading. Someone managing perception instead of performance. Someone more concerned with narrative than results. That observation mattered more than any review finding. Despite everything, Derek was shortlisted for a promotion. VP of Operations. Bigger scope. More authority. More control. I heard through my network and felt something cold settle in my chest. Not fear. Anger. For a moment, it felt like justice would miss him completely. Like lying and manipulation wouldn't matter. Like charm would win over truth one more time. I felt the old helplessness return. The feeling that competence doesn't matter if someone speaks confidently enough. But I'd learned something important over the past months. Justice isn't dramatic. It's procedural. It doesn't arrive in moments. It accumulates in details. And details take time to compile. The promotion wasn't decided yet. Just consideration. Just possibility. And possibilities require vetting. Background checks. Reference calls. Performance reviews. All the documentation that had been under examination for weeks. Derek was being considered at the exact moment his track record was being questioned. His timing was spectacularly bad. Or perfectly ironic. Depending on perspective. I didn't celebrate. I didn't relax. I just waited. Because I'd learned that watching incompetence catch up to confidence requires patience. Not hope. Not assumptions. Just documentation and time. The executive team asked Derek to explain inconsistencies. Why had he spoken for employees without their approval? Why had he claimed team consensus when no team discussion occurred? Why had documentation not matched his verbal explanations? These weren't accusatory questions. Just clarifying. But clarifying questions are dangerous when your story is holes. Derek tried to explain. He talked about leadership prerogative, about efficiency, about acting in the team's best interest. But they asked specific questions. Which team members did you consult? He couldn't name them. When did these consultations occur? He couldn't provide dates. Do you have documentation of his consensus? He didn't. Each answer made the next question harder. Each gap made his original story look more intentional. He wasn't forgetting details. He was admitting details never existed. The team decision had been his decision. The consensus had been his assumption. The support had been their silence. He tried to redirect. Talked about my performance. My fit. My alignment. But they'd reviewed my work. They'd see my contributions. They'd noticed projects struggling without me. His criticisms didn't match the evidence. He couldn't answer cleanly. And in executive evaluations, unclear answers become red flags. Derek reached out to me again. This time the email was different. Less confident. More careful. I understand you've been in contact with HR, he wrote. Would you be willing to clarify your intent regarding certain statements? Intent. Like my statements needed interpretation. Like providing factual documentation was somehow manipulative. Like telling the truth required ulterior motives. He was trying to make this personal. Emotional. A conflict between us, rather than a question of his honesty. I read the email twice. Then I replied with 5 words. I've been completely transparent. I didn't elaborate. Didn't explain. Didn't engage with his framing. Just stated fact and stopped. He tried again the next day. I'm just trying to understand the full picture. Again, implying my perspective was incomplete. Biased. Unreliable. He needed me to doubt myself. To second-guess my documentation. To feel like maybe I'd misunderstood. I didn't reply the second time. Because understanding wasn't his goal. Control was. And I was finally completely detached from his need for it. He taught me that silence could be powerful. Now I was using it more effectively than he ever had. Derek was quietly removed from key projects. Not fired, not demoted officially, just reassigned. To focus on strategic initiatives, leadership said. Strategic initiatives with no teams, no deliverables, no authority. His meetings were canceled. His input was no longer requested. Decisions happened without him, the same way mine once had. He sent emails that went unanswered. He offered suggestions that were politely ignored. He became optional. This was corporate erasure. Slower than firing, quieter than demotion, but more complete, because it left him technically employed while completely marginalized. His title remained. His salary continued, but his influence vanished. People stopped copying him on important threads. His calendar filled with placeholder meetings that meant nothing. His opinions were noted but never implemented. He was being managed out through irrelevance. I heard about this through former colleagues. People who'd once avoided me now shared updates. Not out of loyalty, out of fascination. Derek's fall was visible to everyone who'd watched him rise. And falls are always more interesting than climbs. Former coworkers started reaching out with apologies. Not for firing me. They hadn't done that. But for staying quiet. For not speaking up. For choosing safety over honesty. Each apology felt similar. Guilty but justified. Sorry but necessary. I accepted none of them personally. Not because I was angry. Because apologies for compliance don't undo complicity. They just acknowledge it existed. And acknowledgement without change is just performance. Sarah apologized for not contradicting Derek in the meeting. I should have said something, she told me over coffee. But she wouldn't have. Fear was real. Her mortgage was real. Her choice made sense. I didn't blame her. But I didn't absolve her either. Marcus apologized for avoiding me during the termination. I felt terrible, he said. But feeling terrible while doing nothing is just comfort. It's not courage. It's not solidarity. It's self-protection dressed as regret. Jennifer apologized for asking me questions after I was fired while never checking on me as a person. I should have done more, she said. Should have. Conditional regret. Regret that didn't cost anything to express now that the danger had passed. Accountability isn't emotional. It's structural. And none of these apologies changed structures. The VP promotion quietly went to someone else. No announcement about Derek. No explanation. Just a new name in the role. Internal communication mentioned leadership alignment and strategic fit. Corporate language for rejection. Derek pretended it was his choice. Decided to focus on my current scope, he told people. Wasn't the right timing. He smiled when he said it. The same smile he'd used when lying about team decisions. But his eyes looked different now. Harder. More careful. People nodded when he explained. They didn't question his narrative. But they didn't believe it either. Everyone knew he'd been passed over. Everyone understood why. The review findings weren't public, but their implications were clear. You don't remove someone from projects because of success. You don't skip promoting someone because they're performing well. You don't reassign authority because of competence. The logic was obvious to anyone paying attention. Derek's influence had been built on perception. Smart, strategic, connected, but perception requires maintenance. And his had cracked. Once people see behind the curtain, they can't unsee. Once trust breaks, it doesn't naturally heal. Leadership offered Derek a mutual separation. Consulting language. Face-saving exit. He could leave with dignity intact. No public termination. No formal discipline. Just a quiet conclusion to a relationship that no longer worked. The offer was generous considering the findings. He'd lied about team consensus. He'd manipulated employees. He'd taken credit for others' work. Any of those could justify immediate termination. But companies prefer clean endings. Litigation-proof departures. Mutually agreed separations. Derek had 3 weeks to decide. During that time, his authority continued shrinking. His meetings were reduced. His access was limited. His influence approached zero. They were showing him what staying would look like. Marginalized. Irrelevant. Embarrassing. He took the separation. Negotiated a decent package. Decent title on the exit paperwork. Decent references for future opportunities. Everything looked professional on paper. But everyone inside the company knew. He'd been managed out. Politely. Completely. His name was never publicly tarnished. No scandal. No drama. No headlines. Just absence. Which is its own form of consequence. Because people remember absences when they're sudden. They fill the gaps with truth when official stories feel thin. 6 months after leaving, Derek reached out one final time. "I'm doing some consulting work," his email said. "Building a new team. Could use someone with your background. Would you consider joining? Just briefly. Just to help with transition." He wanted me to save him again. To make him look competent again. To fill the gaps in his knowledge again. After firing me. After lying about me. After using my work to build a reputation he couldn't maintain alone. The audacity was almost impressive, but also predictable. Because Derek had never understood what he'd lost. He thought my value was in my output, in the files I created, in the systems I built. He didn't understand that value included saying no. I didn't respond. Not with anger. Not with satisfaction. Just silence. The same silence he'd once used to claim consensus. The same silence his team had used when he fired me. But this time, the silence meant something different. It meant I was done. Not bitter. Not vengeful. Just finished. He taught me that some questions don't deserve answers. Some requests don't deserve consideration. Some people don't deserve your time. 3 weeks later, he sent a follow-up. "Just checking if you saw my previous email." I marked it as read. That was answer enough. Derek's LinkedIn profile changed 18 months after I was fired. No longer with the company. Now seeking new opportunities. Standard language for unemployment. He posted occasionally about leadership, about team building, about trust. The irony was thick. Posts about integrity from someone who'd lied about team consensus. Posts about transparency from someone who'd manipulated employees. Posts about respect from someone who'd stolen credit. Each post got minimal engagement. A few polite likes. No comments. His network had thinned. People who used to endorse him had gone quiet. Recommendations from senior leaders had vanished. His profile looked like many others. Professional but unremarkable. Experienced but not exceptional. Available but not sought after. I checked his profile once. Not regularly. Just once. Because I wanted to see if patterns continued. They did. He joined another company. Mid-level role. Smaller firm. Less authority than he'd had before. Lateral move at best. Backward slide more likely. His career would probably continue. He'd find positions. He'd make connections. He'd rebuild some reputation. But he'd never get back what he'd lost. Because trust, once broken completely, doesn't return to original strength. My former company restructured after Derek left. New leadership. New processes. New emphasis on documentation. Team decision became a phrase that required proof. Meetings needed minutes. Consensus needed records. Claims needed evidence. The changes weren't dramatic, just procedural. But procedures matter. They create accountability. They prevent the kind of manipulation Derek had practiced. They make it harder to use silence as agreement, to claim support that never existed. The team noticed. Sarah mentioned it during a rare catch-up coffee. "Everything's documented now," she said. "Every decision gets recorded. Every meeting gets notes. It feels slower but safer." Safer. That's the word she used. Because manipulation thrives in ambiguity, in unrecorded conversations, in decisions made verbally and remembered differently. Documentation removes that space. It creates shared truth. It protects everyone. I didn't take credit for these changes. I wasn't responsible. The audit was. The findings were. The leadership's response was. But my situation had been the catalyst. My termination had been the example. My documentation had been the evidence. Sometimes change comes from fixing specific problems. Sometimes it comes from preventing them from happening again. In my new role, my voice was heard. Not because I demanded it. Because the structure allowed it. Meetings included me by default. Decisions involved my input. Credit was shared openly. Work was mine, acknowledged as such, respected publicly. I realized how much energy survival had required at my old job. How exhausting it was to anticipate Derek's moods. To protect myself from his insecurity. To document everything because trust didn't exist. To stay alert because safety wasn't guaranteed. In my new environment, I just worked. Competence was enough. No politics. No navigation. No translation. I contributed. It was valued. The process repeated. That simplicity felt revolutionary after years of complexity. My manager asked my opinion and listened. My colleagues shared credit naturally. My achievements were mine, not borrowed or stolen. This wasn't exceptional. This was basic professionalism. But after Derek, basic felt extraordinary. I stopped checking my old company's updates. Stopped wondering about former coworkers. Stopped comparing situations. I moved forward completely. Not because I'd gotten revenge. Because I'd gotten free. I still document everything. Not from paranoia. From experience. I save emails. I track decisions. I know conversations. I timestamp agreements. It's habit now. Protective instinct that doesn't fade. Some lessons don't leave. They just integrate. Become part of how you operate. I flinch slightly at sudden meetings. I tense when authority figures use vague language. I notice when credit gets misplaced. These aren't wounds. They're sensors. My team doesn't know this history. They see someone organized, prepared, detail-oriented. They don't know I learned these skills defending myself. They don't know documentation saved my credibility when someone tried to erase it. That's fine. The origin doesn't matter. The skill does. I protect myself now automatically. Not frantically. Just consistently. Because trust requires verification. And verification requires records. People sometimes ask why I take so many notes. Just thorough, I say. They accept that. They don't need to know it's armor that looks like diligence. They don't need to know it's protection that feels like process. I understand something now I didn't before. Professionalism doesn't mean endurance. It means boundaries. Loyalty doesn't mean silence. It means honest communication. Teamwork doesn't mean compliance. It means collaboration. Derek taught me these things by violating all of them. He confused my endurance with weakness, my silence with agreement, my competence with obligation. He thought I'd always be there to fix his mistakes because I always had been. But endurance has limits. Silence eventually speaks. And competence chooses where to apply itself. He learned that too late. After he'd already burned the relationship. After he'd already shown me I wasn't valued, just used. The moral clarity came slowly, not in dramatic moments, in quiet realizations. That helping someone who takes credit isn't collaboration. That staying silent when lies are told isn't neutrality, it's consent. That professional doesn't mean powerless. I didn't know Derek my competence after he fired me. I didn't know the company my knowledge after they erased me. I didn't know anyone explanations for boundaries they'd made necessary. Understanding that changed everything. People who once ignored me now watch my career from a distance. LinkedIn connections who never engaged suddenly like posts. Former colleagues who went silent suddenly ask about opportunities. The shift is visible, measurable, interesting. Respect arrived late, but it arrived. Not because I demanded it, because I demonstrated value elsewhere. Because other companies recognized what my old one had dismissed. Because my work spoke when my old company tried to silence me. This validates something important. Your value isn't determined by people who don't see it. It's demonstrated by people who do. Derek's opinion of me mattered less than my new company's. My old team's silence mattered less than my new team's inclusion. I don't need vindication from people who wronged me. I don't need acknowledgement from people who dismissed me. I don't need apologies from people who stayed silent. I just need my work to speak for itself. And it does. The power shift happened quietly, without declaration, without confrontation. I just moved to places that valued me. And from there, everywhere else looked smaller. I didn't destroy anyone. I didn't sabotage Derek. I didn't poison his reputation. I didn't campaign against him. I just stopped covering for his incompetence. I stopped fixing his mistakes. I stopped making him look good. The truth did the rest. His lies required my silence. His success required my support. His reputation required my labor. When I removed those things, what remained was just Derek. Unfiltered, unassisted, unprotected. That was enough. More than enough. Because competence built on other people's work eventually collapses when those people leave. Authority, based on manipulation, eventually fails when people start comparing stories. Confidence without foundation eventually cracks under pressure. I didn't need to attack. I just needed to absent myself from his construction. To let the building stand or fall on its own merit. It fell. Not because I pushed. Because I stopped holding it up. Sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is simply stop compensating for someone else's inadequacy. Stop being the invisible foundation. Stop being the uncredited support. Just step back and let reality show itself. Derek called it a team decision. He used our silence as consensus. He wrapped his choice in collective language to make it seem inevitable, reasonable, supported. But teams remember what really happened. They remember being told instead of asked. They remember fear instead of agreement. They remember silence that meant something other than support. In the end, the team did decide. Not about my termination. About Derek's credibility. About his trustworthiness. About whether his version of events matched reality. They decided quietly, individually, through honest statements when finally asked. They decided he'd lied. That his team decision had been manipulation. That his consensus had been assumption. That his leadership had been control. Those decisions accumulated, combined, created consequences he couldn't charm his way past. He thought he could speak for the team. He thought their silence belonged to him. He thought fear was the same as loyalty. He was wrong about all of it. He called it a team decision. In the end, the team decided who he really was.